Hello everyone from Juno Community and beyond. Welcome to another episode of the Inside Scoop. I am very, very, very buzzing about the weather today, and I have the Frey from Howl with us today. Thank you for joining. How are you doing?
Always a pleasure to get wet. Andrew WK.
It's it's such a great location. I wish the sun was shining, but you know, you can't be in Manchester if it's not a rainy day. So let's get right into it. So overall mission, Howl. Can you tell us a little bit why you built it and what's the idea behind it?
Well, on the why side, I don't want to just say YOLO, but there's always an element of that, right? Like if you hack on stuff, you kind of just make stuff habitually, you know. But I guess like some bits of it go back all the way to talking to Jake and Shane, the Stargaze guys, about they did a very early beta, which I don't think at the time I really understood. But they talked a lot about kind of monetization strategies for content. And actually this is something that Jake and I have been talking about for years, going back to, you know, Peter Sunday and Flatter and the Pirate Bay and all that stuff, you know. Yeah. So before Juno launched, I helped write a lot of documentation for CosmWasm and stuff like that, and was mucking around with contracts. And one of the things I built was a kind of stupid thing for sort of creating derivative tokens to represent music. Not NFTs, but like kind of a bonding curve thing. Like, and it was kind of like an interesting kind of hack, but it didn't really have much staying power. So, but that was kind of, I guess, like those ideas were sort of floating around, right? And then so there's this broader thing about you know, like advertising and how that doesn't work as a way of paying for content. Like that's, you know, Naomi Klein and all that sort of stuff, no logo, and that's like a philosophical underpinning for it all. And then the actual Howl itself is like going back to Ruby on Rails, which, you know, I started my career too long ago as a Ruby on Rails engineer, and the canonical example for that to like get started was to build a Twitter clone. So I think it was like maybe Greg from Regen or somebody like that, like in Lisbon in 2021, like started writing the name server, started writing a bunch of other things that eventually got launched, and was just like, you know, people were like, oh, what are you working on now? And I was kind of like, well, everybody says like CosmWasm is super scalable and you can do these huge option contracts and all sorts of stuff which has loads and loads of volume, but could you build an on-chain broadcast platform? Can it handle that? Yeah. And it was conversations with people like that where I was just like, they were like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, oh, you know, I just started kind of shit posting and saying, yeah, at some point, fuck it, why not build a Twitter clone, right? And yeah, like I say, if you're from the Ruby background, like that was literally the thing you built. So it's quite like when I learn a new programming language or a new thing, I will quite often, I built a few of these, you know, over the years as a laugh. So the fact it then took a year from there to get to, you know, and obviously many more contributors, lots of other people involved, Callum, Weaver, a whole bunch of other people. It still fundamentally, I guess, started from like, you know, the first commit in a hotel lobby at Cosmoverse in Lisbon 2021.
Amazing. What are the benefits of using, I suppose, a decentralized social media platform like Howl compared to like traditional Twitter, Facebook?
No advertising. That's like the big one. Is there's no economic incentive to the devs to shove adverts in your face or to manipulate what you're looking at to show you ads or to keep your engagement, like to make you pissed off so that you engage with the platform more so they can show you more ads, like all of that stuff. I mean, even algorithmic feeds, like one of the interesting things post-launch is people are like, I want a custom feed. And like, I get that. People can build it. You can actually plug all that stuff in. You could do a custom index and you could do that any number of ways on top of the contracts. I'm really boring. I actually want the original Twitter feed where I just follow a few people and I see only their posts in fucking order. Like without any of the bullshit that is supposed to piss me off or, you know, create artificial engagement. So I think like the kind of psychological and political and like personal space argument for me is like one of the biggest ones, but I know like lots of people project their own frustrations onto traditional social media, and so there are obviously lots of different things you can do with this that are things that we as devs wouldn't even have thought of. One of the big ones obviously is just, monetization of your own content rather than somebody else monetizing it. And that's obviously huge. And that kind of goes beyond what you see now, which is the minimum viable product, to, blogs, wikis, Stack Overflow, all that kind of stuff. As long as it's content that you're happy being out there, on chain, potentially for good, because everything is on chain. It's not, there is no kind of.
No, just going to stop you there. Like, how do you put all that? Because all that data can't fit on chain, can it? How are you dealing with that data?
It's all on chain.
All on chain. So how, as far as I'm aware, you were aiming it to be more of a blog post as well, like a Medium style.
Yes.
How do you then tackle it?
Well, so that's the complicated bit, essentially, because the essentially markdown posts are too big to fit on chain. So you need like co-located IPFS, like run by the validator set, to essentially guarantee there's enough storage for that, and then you need an incentive mechanism for all of that. So we have some of that worked out, but that's kind of like a further in the future thing, and that's kind of what the Minerva project is about can you build additional incentive mechanisms on top to incentivize validators to run more infrastructure, right? So that's a much more longer term kind of idea of where Howl could go. And then like the shorter term version is you can just run some IPFS nodes that are unincentivized to make that stuff work. Under the hood, most of that is already implemented. It's just there's no UI for it yet. And there's no IPFS nodes. But that's like obviously the roadmap. That's kind of where we're going.
And for the viewers, that can you explain what Minerva is? Is it
so Minerva is at the moment it's fucking vaporware. Obviously, it doesn't exist.
But the idea
is like a chain with incentivized, with a way of incentivizing validating the val set to run additional infrastructure, and as a part of that, a lot of these things that we currently think of as oracles, which is interaction with stuff in Web 2. Which, in the case of something like Howl, is going to be more like authority, like proof of authority and that kind of side of things. And the goal for that chain is to be the first CW SDK chain in production.
Amazing.
But there's a lot of things.
It's looking down the fairway there.
There's a lot of things that need to happen for CW SDK to be production ready, and it's obviously CW SDK itself is a side project of Larry from Mars Protocol. There's just not a lot of dev hours involved in these things at the moment because there's no money for it. So
of course.
It's quite speculative, but that's where we want to be.
I mean, it's good that you've got these ideas in place. It's a vision. It's exciting. I love the thought of it. I mean, you've kind of answered my question and touched on a little bit on the functioning and how do you ensure the platform remains decentralized and secure by its own little validator set, I suppose.
And also like Howl itself obviously is owned by the Howl DAO. So very specifically, if you look in the terms and conditions, one of the things that took a long time to get done was the legal side of things. And it's a very new area. It wasn't cheap to get done. It was quite complicated to find the right people and kind of go through that process. But if you look at the legal terms and conditions, you'll see that at the moment it was launched and run by the multi-sig, and the multi-sig kind of is responsible for shepherding the early bit of Howl. But you'll see in the legal terms and conditions that the multi-sig has to vest the contracts into the DAO within 12 months. That is like a legal requirement of Howl. And beyond that point, the DAO and anybody developing on Howl have to have a more kind of back and forth relationship by necessity. Right. So that's one of the ways in which it's sort of guarded against. Another one is purely simply that because of the inflation mechanism of Howl, early people involved in the project can be inflated away. And so there's no guarantee that just because you were here early, you're going to own the project, because eventually inflation will catch up with you. So there's also that.
That's very interesting. Thanks for answering that. Where do you see Howl and the broader decentralized social media space heading? Do you see it competing? I mean, we're not here to compete with some of the biggest in the world, obviously, but there were some good ideas being thrown around on your show, Game of Nodes. Check it out, please. About a Stack Overflow potentially with the use case with Howl. That sounds pretty good, by the way. I like
so
the
Stack
idea.
Overflow, wiki type stuff. All of these ideas are all possible. They're just taking the post content types that already exist and making different UI for them with the same staking mechanics under the hood. So if we had 100 developers and a few $1 million, we'd be building all these things. As it is, it's still several people working on it part-time, and we'll get there when we get there. These are all really good ideas, and if people want to help us out, we're always open to a conversation. We're not totally deadbeat. We do have some resources, but we're having to be careful about what we use where, because it is a very bootstrap project. We have no VCs, no investors, none of that sort of stuff. So
I've got to ask, like, why Juno? Why did you build on Juno? We obviously know the people who know you, Frey, they know how much you contribute to the network. But if for anybody outside of Cosmos wondering why it is you're working on Juno, could you maybe answer some of that?
Well, I mean, going back to like the first commit on Howl is so long ago that GitHub rounds it up to 2 years. So the simplest answer is at that point it was Terra or Juno, and obviously it was going to be Juno. And we continue to work on Juno because all of us that are involved in Howl worked on other projects in Juno, right? So if you've used Cos and Wasm tools, you've used something that Weaver built. Weaver also built a bunch of proof of concept stuff around not having to pay gas fees every time you execute transactions. And obviously Callum was core to a lot of the work early on in DAO, right? So it was where we already were. Is part of the reason. Community is often the motivation for why things happen, right? And that's definitely the case here.
What do you need from the community? How do we find Howl?
So at the moment it's still in beta. It's in production in beta, which is a weird thing, but the contracts are unaudited, so your mileage may vary, as they say. It's on beta.howl.social. And you can interact with it now. If you are a Juno staker, there is a chance that you actually have an airdrop which will expire at the end of the month, which is February at the time of recording. So you can go interact with it now, and if you have tokens you can stake them and get involved in the DAO. That's probably the best. What we've already seen is that we all have, like I said, mentioned, we all have day jobs. And since launching, a lot of the motions on the DAO, a lot of the interaction, a lot of the things that have happened have actually been driven by the community, not by us. And that's really cool, and hopefully that will continue. So that's
very
exciting
active
to see what the community does with it, really.
Good. Well, thanks for coming on. I know it's getting a bit cold.
It's literally raining. It is literally raining.
You need to get back on your bike.